What happens when a midnight train isn't just a ride, but a one-way ticket to the unknown? Michael thought he was just on his way to a business meeting, but the train had other plans that would trap him in a nightmare he couldn't escape. It was a cold, foggy night when Michael rushed to the nearly empty train station. The city was quiet, and the streets felt abandoned. He had just received an urgent call from his boss, an emergency business meeting in a distant city. The only train to get there on time was the Midnight Express, which had a reputation of being odd. As Michael waited on the platform, he noticed something strange. The train station was almost deserted. A few people lingered in the corners, their faces shadowed. A man, elderly and hunched over, sat on a bench near the platform's edge. His eyes locked with Michael's, and he whispered in a trembling voice, "Don't board the midnight train. It's not meant for people like you." Michael dismissed the warning. It was just some crazy old man rambling, nothing more. The train arrived with a screeching halt, its rusted body barely visible in the darkness. The station master waved him on, and Michael climbed aboard. The moment Michael stepped onto the train, a chill ran down his spine. The train was eerily silent. The dim lights flickered as if struggling to stay on, and the air smelled old, like it hadn't been ventilated in decades. The seats were cracked, and the upholstery was covered in dust. Michael walked down the aisle, trying to find a comfortable spot. As he took his seat, he couldn't help but notice the other passengers. An old woman across from him clutched a porcelain doll, whispering to it softly, her voice barely audible. Another man, dressed in an old-fashioned suit with a tall hat, sat quietly with a leather-bound notebook in front of him. He was scribbling something in it, pausing occasionally to glance at Michael. Every time their eyes met, the man smiled strangely but said nothing. Michael tried to ignore them. It was late, and he needed to focus on the meeting ahead. Yet, something felt off. The train started moving, its wheels screeching against the tracks as it left the station. A few minutes passed, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the other passengers were different. Not in a physical sense, but in the way they acted. They didn't seem to acknowledge one another, and no one spoke a word. As the train hurtled through the night, strange things started happening. The air grew colder. The overhead lights flickered sporadically. Michael's phone, which had been working just fine, suddenly froze. He looked at it, confused. The time was stuck at 12 a.m. Through the window, he tried to peer into the night, but the view outside was shrouded in thick fog. He could barely make out the outlines of trees and distant hills. The train's speed seemed to increase, though he couldn't see the tracks ahead. He could only hear the rhythmic clattering of the wheels. Soon, the train began to slow down, screeching as it pulled into what seemed like an abandoned station. The doors opened, but no one got off. The atmosphere was thick with silence. One of the passengers, a man dressed in black, stood up and walked toward the door. He didn't even look at anyone as he exited. Michael's eyes widened. He felt a strange urge to follow him, but his legs wouldn't move. When the doors closed again, the man was gone. But what disturbed Michael was that the seat the man had been sitting in was completely untouched. The blanket he had been draped in, the coffee cup he had been holding, everything was perfectly placed, as though he had never existed at all. The train began moving again, but this time, Michael couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that settled in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He stood up from his seat and made his way down the narrow aisle, glancing at each of the passengers. Everyone remained still, as though they were statues. He found himself drawn to the man in the tall hat, who was still scribbling in his notebook. When Michael approached, the man finally looked up. "Why is everyone so quiet?" Michael asked, his voice shaky. The man smiled, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, He closed his notebook with a soft thud and looked directly at Michael. "You're not here by accident, Michael." "What do you mean?" Michael felt a cold sweat form on his back. He was beginning to feel like he wasn't just a passenger on this train, but a part of something far darker. "This train," the man said, "is for people who are lost, people who are on their way to the end. You're here because you couldn't accept the truth about your own fate." Michael took a step back, shaking his head. "This is insane. I just need to get to my meeting." The man's smile widened. "You don't get to choose. The train doesn't take you to where you want to go. It takes you to where you need to be." Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The train was plunged into darkness. Michael's heart raced as he felt his way down the aisle. But before he could reach the next carriage, the lights flickered back on. When they did, Michael saw something horrifying. The faces of the other passengers had changed. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions blank, as if they were all waiting for something. The man in the tall hat spoke again. "You've seen enough. You've always been on this train, Michael. You just never knew it." Michael froze. He glanced down at the notebook the man had been holding and with trembling hands snatched it from the table. He flipped through the pages, his heart pounding in his chest. Each page contained the names of passengers, and next to each name, a word was written. Judgment, oblivion, eternity. He stopped at his own name. It was written in bold, dark ink, afterlife. Panicking, Michael ran to the front of the train, desperate to stop it, to escape. But no matter how hard he tried to pull the lever or push the buttons, the train didn't slow down. When the train finally came to a halt, Michael found himself at the same station he had boarded. But something was different. He was outside, looking at himself boarding the train again. He watched in horror as his own doppelganger stepped onto the train, oblivious to what was happening. Michael tried to scream, to warn himself, but his voice was lost in the heavy fog. He was powerless to stop the cycle from repeating. The doors of the train slid shut, and Michael realized the awful truth. This train, this journey, was an eternal loop, a purgatory. He had been chosen to ride it forever, unable to escape the consequences of his fate. And so, Michael's journey on the midnight train continues, a never-ending loop that blurs the line between reality and the afterlife. Was it fate, or is the train merely a reflection of the choices we make in life? The next stop may not be as far as you think. So, the question remains, would you dare to board the midnight train? Subscribe to Spectral Tales for more stories that blur the lines between the living and the dead. Who knows, the next story might just be about you.